Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rach, and I'm joined today by my guest, Christopher Gray. Welcome to the show, Christopher.
Hi, Rach. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's a big day for you, right?
A bit busy. There was a Kickstarter that launched this morning that I'm personally invested in. We've been batting around emails and Facebook posts all morning.
I'm glad you were able to make time to talk to me today.
Of course I am. I always have time for you.
How long have you been playing Powered by the Apocalypse games, Christopher? What was your gateway?
I'm still a baby. My first game was a couple of years ago. I happened to be at Strategicon in LA. Dave Kazave, who's known for Spirit of 77, was running his beta test of Bedlam Hall. And I had never played a Powered by the Apocalypse game before. And that was my entryway. And ever since, it's been a steam train. I loved it so much. I didn't realize how powerful it could be and how transformative it was for the role-playing experience for me, because I came from a traditional background. I ended up devouring it, and I fell into Monster of the Week, Apocalypse World, and then I started backing all the Kickstarters, and I got Threadbare, and the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, there's been so many Kickstarters in the past few years. I have a small mountain of books that I'm telling myself I'm going to read eventually, but I haven't managed to crack open yet. Shh, don't tell anyone.
I like to just read them. I mean, they're so much fun to read, and the writing is always so good in them. And even if you never play them, I love reading them. And I have a bunch now. I have this huge shelf, just nothing but PBTA.
Yeah, I had a friend come over last night and be like, "Excuse me, I need to go stare at the shelf for a while."
Don't get lost.
He kept pulling off random things. I'm like, this is great, but we're playing Tech Noir tonight.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and most recently, though, I really, I mostly run The Happiest Apocalypse on Earth, which was my Kickstarter last year. And because that's what everybody wants to play when I'm around, that's what I end up running. So my PBTA, well, actually a little dry. Ever since that Kickstarter. So, there's a warning for you. If you want to play PBTA, don't do a PBTA Kickstarter.
But Happiest Apocalypse is the one game that's about theme parks. And my deep, dark secret is when I go to the gym, I don't listen to RPG podcasts. I listen to theme park podcasts.
It's perfect for you, especially if you know the horrible, terrifying secrets of these theme parks and the elder horrors that they hide.
Go away green, etc.
Yeah, right.
Let's move on to our first segment of the show, Read a Sitch, where Christopher and I will discuss something related to Powered by the Apocalypse play or table culture that he wants to spotlight on.
Read a Sitch.
Chris, what really sticks in your mind about Powered by the Apocalypse play? What do you think we should be spending a little bit more time maybe thinking about and exploring?
I think that especially for players that are not accustomed to these types of games, where the framework tends to be a little looser and narrative driven, it's difficult to handle Spotlight, or can be. In other words, how much time is a particular player getting versus another player, and since we don't have an initiative mechanic or an order mechanic or even a Spotlight mechanic in most games, some games do, but not all of them. How do you, as an MC or a game master, shift to the spotlight equitably so that everybody has their time to shine?
Yeah, that is something that I've heard from people getting started in both playing and running Powered by the Apocalypse games. Big challenge. I had a friend who was just so frustrated he swore off PBTA games for a while. Oh,
that's too bad. I think it can be frustrating for the player. I also think it can be frustrating for the game master, especially if you have somebody that's an extremely vocal and active player, and you have a player that maybe isn't so much.
What tools do you use to help balance the spotlight at your tables, Chris?
Well, I like to look at it as a TV show or movie, in my mind. So when you look at it from that point of view, then you're thinking about cuts and fades and transitions, and so I don't really go in a particular order, but I'm following the action, and then I will know then, since I'm looking at it visually in my mind, that there's we've forgotten about this scene over here or this character over here, so I will turn to look and then recap everything that's happened to that point, and then say, okay, so what's going on with you, or if it's something I can even make a more direct question or a leading question and say, well, what do you do about your friend that is falling down the Ferris wheel being chased by an animatronic, for example?
Do you take any notes, for example, if you maybe have caught out of like the corner of your mind that a player hasn't had the spotlight, but it's not quite the right moment to cast the spotlight there, just so you don't forget? Or do you let it naturally flow at the table?
I tend to use those as dramatic moments because I'll try to go naturally and flow. I'm also a very physical MC, so I'm usually standing and gesturing and being dramatic. But I will, if I know in my mind that I need to get to this person and I'm afraid that I might forget it, I might interrupt this scene and say, okay, wow, that's happening. I really, I'm going to get to something, so hold on, we're going to get right there. That's a mental note for me. I've actually cued it in my head by saying that, and then I can go back here, resolve this, and then I'll know to go back there. That also knows that they know I haven't forgotten about them.
That's a really great idea, acknowledging the player and saying, like, for you to get spotlight is more important than this player who may have had the spotlight for a considerable amount of time.
Yeah, and then on the inverse of that coin is the person that gets a lot of spotlight, and they may be a very forgiving player or even a player that is typically good at doing spotlight but is so excited about what's happening. And, when the snowball starts going in PBTA, you just keep going and going and going. And in those moments, I try to find a cliffhanger, a moment where I can say, oh, wow, okay, we're going to find out how this resolves in just a moment. And sometimes, especially if it's a good cliffhanger, I'll actually take the triggered move and the roll, and before we adjudicate, I'll stop and move on to something else and do a quick cut to something else. And that kind of keeps the person that's too active in suspense, and so they're still engaged and they don't feel interrupted.
How do you engage players that are a little bit more reserved or quiet at the table?
Well, there's two types. There are those that are shy and just are afraid to insert themselves. And in those cases, I will try to clear the floor a bit for them, and then again try a recap, bring them up. Okay, let's talk about you. What's going on with you right now in this moment? Oh, and usually that's enough, and that person will then, oh yeah, this is something I want to do. But the other type of person is one that doesn't really know what to do, or might be afraid of the machine a bit and needs a little bit of help. And in that case, I just start asking questions. They start broad, and then they become more and more narrow. And if I really run into a trouble with that, I'll give choices. So if it's a broad thing like, okay, what do you think about this? We're still in Happiest Apocalypse, so somebody is this animatronic pirate is doing this horrible thing to your friend over here, and cutting him open and all of the horrible, grotesque, horrible things that happen in this park. What do you do about that? What do you think about that? And if that doesn't help, then I'll say, okay, well, there is a way for you to leave, or there's a way for you to come and pull your friend out, or any of those choices, something that your character would think of doing. And it goes on like that. And then I just kind of feed as much as I need to for them to make a decision.
Just presenting their options and letting them learn the system through making narrative choices.
Yeah, that's right. And in this game we're going to be discussing tonight, the Great American Novel, this problem is a little more apparent, because it's less about defending yourself from an attacking monster and more about what is your motivation and what do you want out of this. So the machine has got to have something for them to look at and back into. And when I was designing it, I did that with that in mind, knowing my MC style, that I'd want them to be able to look at their sheet and say, your prime fear is this. Knowing that, what would your character do?
That seems like a great segue into our next segment, Open Your Brain, where Chris and I will be discussing his new game on Kickstarter,
The Great American Novel, a role-playing game.
Open your brain.
What's a Great American Novel?
What is a Great American Novel, or what is the Great American Novel, a role-playing game?
Both?
Okay. A Great American Novel is under great debate among academia as to what precisely it is. However, the trends that we tend to see from Great American Novels are, one, that they need to be literary. In other words, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of action or plot focus. You're going to be more in the minds of the characters and in their motivations. The other thing, which tends to lead to a higher quality literary piece, as opposed to Neil Gaiman, as much as I love him, academics wouldn't call him literary. So that's one. The other thing is it needs to be realistic. That doesn't mean you can't have magic. It just means that you have to have a realistic approach to it. It also means that you probably are going to embed yourself more into the culture or history of what you're writing. You might even use dialogue in your book that sounds like the way people speak in that particular area of the country, etc. The third thing is that it needs to be uniquely Americana. Like, it wouldn't really happen anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about great American novels, like, for example, To Kill a Mockingbird, that's a uniquely Americana story.
And what is the great American novel, The Role-Playing Game?
The role-playing game is about creating a game or a session in your game that is character-driven and motivated, not plot-driven and motivated. And that creates an entire story. The idea is that when you're done playing the game, you will have experienced the same sort of experience you would have if you read a novel.
So you mentioned something interesting there, that this could be for just one session of a particular game. Do you see this game being used for, perhaps we're going to do a breakout session away from the system we're currently using to do sort of like a contained one-shot with the same characters?
I think that it can be extended in as much as as the story can be. So if you have a 13-session campaign that is one story, then great. It's not going to work very well for serialized stories necessarily. And the chapter structure there's a chapter structure that's built into the game, sort of propels you to tell a complete story. You won't be able to tell open-ended ones. So I think it works best in a short campaign format, 2 to 6 sessions, enough to tell the complete story.
How are the mechanics of the Great American Novel different than the mechanics of Apocalypse World?
Well, I think PBTA people and Apocalypse World fans will see a lot of that in there. It's definitely built on that. I like to say it's on a PBTA chassis, but there are quite a bit of things that are built on top of that are unique to this game. The biggest one is, in addition to you have things, they're called archetypes, but they're basically playbooks. And you have a spectrum of success. You have moves that are triggered by the narrative that are adjudicated through a 2d6 roll. So you have all of that. But the thing that's really interesting beyond that is that it is it's entirely character focus. So you're not seeing things like harm. You're not seeing even really character advancement. The playbooks don't really have any moves that are unique to them. What you're seeing instead is a series of motivations that you have to choose from, or you're seeing a character arc, which is your prime metric that tells you, are you rising towards a heroic fate, or are you falling towards a tragic end? And that spectrum changes throughout the game, but that's really your only key metric on how you're tracking your progress through the story. And that's not whether you're hurt or not, or whether you're accomplishing goals or not. It's what's your state here? Are you becoming a better person or a worse one? Are you making better choices or worse ones?
You mentioned there were several archetypes, which are the playbooks for this game. Can you list a couple of examples of the different archetypes people can play? I mean, we've talked about the Great American Novel being this abstract concept, but what roles do you see players in?
I did a lot of research trying to find common elements between a lot of established Great American novels, looking not only at the old texts that we might know from, The Great Gatsby and that era, but newer ones like Beloved. Where what are the common elements? And I found there were many. I would say many of them are really self-explanatory when you look at them. One of my favorites is the sacrificial innocent. These novels tend to have a character that should not be harmed but is, and because of that creates different motivations for the main characters. There's ones like the loyal lieutenant. When you think about the Samwise Gamgees of the world that are going to make their hero get through at any cost. Or the honorable guardian, the oath-sworn champion, the conflicted right fighter, your Atticus Finch, who's trying to do right in spite of all of the things that are going on. These archetypes are really telling you what your role in the story is. Now, that story can be anything. The other characters can be anything, but your role is this.
Which one of the archetypes is your favorite?
I really like the Secret Devil.
Yeah, that one grabbed me.
Everybody really likes the Secret Devil. I like it because it propels players to play a villain, but inevitably they turn out to be less villainous than they thought. That the conflicts that are created more often than not change them into a more positive character arc than they expected. So you always you tend to end in a redemption story because you sort of psychologically start and I'm a fill in the blank whatever that has these bad machinations or whatever your situation is. This last example, when we played The Shining at Strategicon recently, everybody that does the Secret Devil believes that they're going to be the psychopath in the game, and they hardly ever are, because they grow and the arc forces you to grow. Whereas if you start as the conflicted right fighter, you might end up falling and take a bad turn towards the end. So yeah, that's my favorite because it usually is just sort of I think people have a misguided idea of how it'll turn out for them.
Yeah, I've often been in games, Powered by the Apocalypse games especially, where people pick up a playbook and they're like, yeah, I'm going to be like the PC villain of the piece, but there's no mechanics to really guide that. And I love the idea of having a archetype that's framed as that, but then there's mechanics that give them space to be like, you are just as flawed and just as human as all these other characters at the table.
Right, and the game doesn't assume anything about you because all it assumes is that you have a motivation, and your motivation is going to go into conflict with other people's motivations, and or into motivations of the setting. Let's say you are in the Dust Bowl. The Great Depression is going to be a conflict that's going to be throughout the setting, and so if your motivations go against that, there's going to be conflict. So it doesn't really matter if you are a bad guy, and it doesn't really matter that you're with people that would identify as good guys. You are focused instead on the conflicts between you, or the conflicts between you in the setting, or any of the conflicts that come up on the play. In fact, conflicts, if I can do a segue, is another major difference on this game than you would find in PBTA. In normal PBTA, as you know, is something the narrative triggers a move, then you roll and you adjudicate. Mm-hmm. In the Great American Novel, you can't really make a move unless you're confronting a conflict. So you might say, I want to persuade this person, and I'm trying to persuade this person to do what I want. You can't just roll a persuade move because you're doing that. Instead, you would have to say, this person is getting in the way of my motivation, so I'm going to try to change their mind. And then my question is always how and why. And why is really important in this game, because if you're trying to change somebody's mind by, let's say, striking them and giving them a broken nose, that's very different than if you are doing it because you're protecting yourself or because you're angry at them. So it's not that you struck them in the nose, it's that I'm angry at them or I'm trying to protect myself. And those are two different moves. Mm-hmm. So you have got to have a conflict for that to work, though. So you would say, this person is taking somebody that I love from me. So you're not protecting yourself then, are you? You're really lashing out. And that's a conflict that you have to resolve. And so there are literally like fate index cards on the table with conflicts written on them. And before you make a move, I ask, which conflict are you confronting? Because that will frame what move is going to work.
It also helps the players to reincorporate those plot threads, I'm guessing.
Right. Yeah. It keeps them aligned with their motivation, because if they look at it, they say, no, I'm going to strike him because that's the right thing to do. Well, is it? Because this is a falling move, lashing out. If you were telling me that you're trying to protect this person, that's one thing. But when you read The Great Gatsby, that's not what's happening at all, is it? These are selfish motivations. That's why the characters are all falling. And that's why you need conflicts in place so you can be extremely clear about what you're doing and why.
What's your favorite move in the game?
It's harder to find just a particular move that you're pointing at because they're very abstract and they're designed that way on purpose. So if you are, it's things like lashing out or protect yourself, like I just mentioned. I think what I'd have to say in the answer to this question is I like how the moves are structured, because you have flat moves, and there are 3 of them that you can do anytime. And they're pretty general moves, like navigate others, where you're just trying to get somebody to do something without causing a problem. But if you're rising, you have another set of moves that you can choose to use. But you can only use them if you're rising. And then there's a set of moves that you can only use if you're falling. And I love that dichotomy, because if you go into a situation where you're trying to enforce your will, that means you're following, or you're trying to condemn. That means you're rallying people against somebody. I mean, the opposite of that would be rally. I'm going to rally everybody in support of somebody. But the fact that you can't do it unless you're rising or falling is I think, what makes this game this game.
To leave listeners on something that might expand their mind and excite them about going out and getting this game, we've talked a little bit about the scholarly academic assumptions about the Great American Novel. What has been the most interesting, unexpected setting or story that came up in playtesting?
I had so many. I tried to push the setting or the framework to see how far it would go. I think probably The Exorcist was
really
the most interesting implementation of this framework. It really was a test, because I've done all kinds of things. I've run True Blood, I've run Fargo here on the Gauntlet, I've run The Godfather. And these are all story-driven. They're character-driven stories. So as long as their motivations are the focus, the game will work. So I wanted to see how far that would go, and so I went to The Exorcist, and I was really stunned about how it worked. But I do have to admit, I had to hack the system a bit.
What did you do?
What I did was, and I had to do this with The Shining as well. So I think I already have a hack that I'm working on horror games for. Because I'm Christopher Gray, I can't help myself. But the big thing I had to change was, in Great American Novel, you move from chapter to chapter by resolving conflicts in a particular way. So if you're starting in chapter 1, which is the ordinary world from the hero's journey, and you resolve a conflict that makes your character uncomfortable, puts yourself in an uncomfortable situation, then you can move into chapter 2. The biggest change in The Exorcist is that you have to fail that in order to move into the next chapter, because we're gonna continue to. You don't resolve the conflict's going to get worse and worse and worse. And the other big change was everybody had to have their own personal demon, which was a conflict that only they could confront. Nobody else at the table could do it. And that conflict was just of your own making. So my personal demon is that I have a lot of guilt about somebody I was unable to protect and lost their life. So now that's what The Exorcist story is going to be about, is the demon of the story is going to go after your personal demon. It worked the same way in The Shining, where the hotel was going after addiction and going to use that against you. So yeah, it did require some hacking, but the system worked. It was able to flex and handle it, and I think that MCs will be able to do that in this way. Like, I'm going to put these trappings on it. We're going to play True Blood. And so you have your setting conflicts, and you might have your own personal conflict, and you can add conflicts in a very Fate sort of way to fill out the story better.
I am eagerly awaiting the existential terror and dread thriller hack that I think is coming.
Yeah, right. I think that there needs to be a horror hack to this, so I'm probably going to run with that next.
Fantastic. We're moving on now to our final segment, Act Under Fire, where Christopher and I will play a short segment of Great American Novel.
It is time to act under fire.
Christopher, you want to segue us into this?
Yeah, so to structure this, there are a series of mechanics where the table can use to decide what they're going to play and when, and what their major themes are. And I figure we could do that a bit just to set this up and then kind of deal with one conflict and to play it out. The first thing that we do is decide on what themes we want. If we were at a table, I would have everybody on an index card write 3 themes that they would like to see in the story. And that could be anything from, I want to see some car chases, to I want to see, suffering a great loss. Or I want to see fall from power, right? Mm-hmm. Or I want it to be about the crashing economy of the Great Depression. So you write these themes out, and then everybody votes and picks 3 major themes. So since we don't have everybody, why don't we just decide what we want in the game unilaterally, or the game does have a random table if you are having trouble making decisions.
Well, I'm looking at the list. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, that would be great.
Let's go with social decay.
Okay.
Do you want to pick one next?
I'm going to put hope on that, because I always run downers, and maybe we can end on a high note.
One more?
Yeah, do you want to pick one?
Yeah, human ingenuity. That seems like a pretty cohesive set of 3.
Yeah, that sounds great. So now that we have our themes, we're going to know this is the sort of session we want. The other thing that we need to do is talk lacunae. Lacunae is a literary term that describes omissions from manuscripts. This is really just a lines and veils thing, but it's built in that at this point we decide what we don't want to include, either outright or we can include but we don't want to focus on, or that we want to fade to black if it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Now this can be, I don't want to play modern. I want it to be something, before 1960. Or it could be, I do not want apex predators destroying people, or I don't want gratuity, that kind of thing. So this is our chance to say what we don't want.
Yeah, my big go-to in situations like this is I can't really talk about on-screen medical torture. It's not professional for me.
All right, and I do not I do not want any sort of sexual violence. This is a organic list, and we'll keep it on. There's obviously X card as well, so we can add that list whenever we want in the game. But that's built in. That's something that you have to do to play. The next thing we decide then is, now that we have these themes, is there a particular time frame we want to follow? First of all, are we playing a great American novel? If so, we also have to consider the three themes of uniquely Americana, realistic, and literary. Or are we going to just kind of do whatever we want with trappings that we both know?
Well, I think we should keep it in the spirit of the game.
Sure. So then let's decide what time period we want to do. We can do a time period and place, or we can look at history in general. Are we talking the New Deal? Are we talking Vietnam War? Or is it a place in time? We've run, for example, 1980s New Mexico. Or is it during the gold rush and we want to be in California? This is always the hardest part, and so we typically will at this point vote on that as well, or just make a unilateral decision.
I'm okay rolling on this one. We got a fancy grid here.
Yeah, let's see.
All right, X or Y first. Let's go up, down. So I've got 1. Oh, hold on. Second die roll. Reconstruction era.
Okay.
What's that for our non-American listeners?
Okay, so this is after the Civil War, and the country is trying to rebuild itself. Slavery has been abolished, and the North and South have come to a tenable agreement, and all of the problems that ensue after that. It's a pretty heavy time. We can pick in different places depending on what kind of experience we're talking about. Human ingenuity. I mean, this can be could be the westward expansion.
Okay, yeah. I have a background in Mormonism. I'm no longer practicing, so I know a little bit of details about the westward expansion.
The railroad was being completed. We had a lot of westward expansion. We had a lot of these frontier towns popping up. This is the Old West. If you're on the East, you're dealing with a lot more politics and integration.
Yeah, so we're going to be playing a pretty, realistic, down-to-earth Western. I did not expect that when we sat down today.
It sounds great to me. I would suggest Colorado, because I know it really well. And that is, Denver was a boomtown. It was the cross-section of many railroads. And that sounds like an interesting place to go. I'm picking on that because of human ingenuity.
Mm-hmm.
So railroad comes to mind. Social decay, I think there's probably a lot of that because of the time period, especially with the reconciliation of the North and the South.
Yeah, a lot of ideals and sort of expectations of society being upturned because of the war and the aftermath.
Right. Okay. Well, this sounds like I think we're good. Normally in this part of the game, I would come up with 2 setting conflicts. These are conflicts that'll be there throughout the entire game. We'll have to think of what those conflicts are, but you can't fix the Civil War. That's always going to be there. But you might resolve something about it in a particular chapter, and then it'll come back in the next chapter. But I do think the shadow of the Civil War should be one of the conflicts.
That sounds like a great idea.
I also think for another conflict we can go with there's a lot of ways to phrase this, but I'm just going to say the frontier.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of these people are coming in with all kinds of money. And lots of things happen because of that.
See, every Western ever.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But one thing I'm going to throw back to you is the kind of experiences we're dealing with more specific conflicts here. Are you thinking you would like to be in the urban setting like a Denver, or on the frontier as the railroad is expanding?
I like the idea of on the frontier. I'm going to be playing the conflicted right fighter, and I had a sense that their ideals came from their home life and their family that was really upturned. And I like the idea of being out on the what could be perceived as the edge of civilization, or the edge of the expansion, rather, and struggling to make meaning out of that and figure out, well, what is right and what is wrong in this very different space.
Okay, then we would figure out relationships and background. At this point, though, since we don't really have any other players playing, we can kind of unilaterally decide what your character concept is, and what motivates your character. You'll see that there are some basic motivations there.
Right.
We would normally start in Chapter 1, the ordinary world.
Mm-hmm.
But since we only have a few minutes, I'm going to suggest let's fast forward a bit and start in Chapter 2, in which your character has been put into an uncomfortable situation, and so is now trying to figure out what to do about it, if that's okay with you.
That is totally okay with me.
Awesome. And what did you have in mind for your character? I think you looked at some background details, and you've looked at your motivations and your basic fears and desires. Do you have a picture?
Yeah, I see her as a woman who has moved from the East Coast out into the expansion. I think she may be coming from a legal background and looking for a space without as many rigid expectations of what a woman should be doing. Her code of ethics comes from her political ideals, from a family with very strong progressive mindsets. She was wrong because of a miscarriage of justice that caused her family to leave their home on the East Coast and go west, and she fights for her loved ones. I think she might have like a mother who isn't well enough to look after herself and is very dependent on her to go get a job and bring in money and try to make a space and home for them out on the expanse.
Is your mother with you?
She lives in the small town that we live in. What's a good small Colorado town at this time?
Silverton is a mining town, obviously, with a name like that.
I wonder what they're mining.
Copper. No. Well, first of all, before we go too far, we have talked in our Lucane about certain themes that we do not want included. Something comes up as a red flag, and I just wanted to address this with the idea of the male hierarchy, especially in the frontier world, and the position of women in this society.
Mm-hmm.
What are your comfort levels of addressing that, or putting it in parentheses, or not addressing it at all?
I'm okay with just not addressing it for the purposes of the AP.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to put that in on the lacuna, lacunae rather. That's plural for lacuna. The other thing I'd like to bring up about that is this is important when you're dealing with issues, especially in the Great American Novel. It'll come up with these times in our past. It's important to be very clear with your players and with the table what it is you want included or not. Well, what's your character's name and your mother's name?
Oh, let's go with Mary because that's a very simple name. And what's a slightly more dated woman's name? And that could be my mom's name.
Esther.
Esther and Mary. Great. Good biblical names.
I usually go there first. So you're in Silverton. Let's say that you have been here for a while, living in, like so many people do, semi-permanent housing, not really an inn or a hotel, but these recently built wooden tenements that many of the miners live at, and then they have come in the last 10 years. So Main Street is just now being built. You have your typical Old West dirty avenue with saloons and with woodworker shops and leather worker shops. There isn't really a big hotel yet, but they're in the middle of working on it. At this point, we can say that maybe you started a minor legal practice, something on the order of a notary, and with all of the land deals that are being made and all of the contracts that need to be signed and all of that, they needed somebody that could help negotiate these things.
You read my mind. I was going to suggest that I'm a lawyer and my practice is mostly about handling these land transactions, which seem to be a booming business here.
That's right. That's good. Okay, cool. So we're aligned. I think the one conflict that maybe we can address here, and typically in gameplay I would introduce them emergently as we were playing, or for the sake of time. Let's say that you were to have an office open up on this main street that they're building. Well, you had put some money in escrow to Silverton's sort of land baron. Let's call him Mr. Calloway. You put that money in escrow, but it seems that Mr. Calloway has been murdered, and there is likely some sort of land dispute that's come up. Somebody's murdered him, and you are now stuck without your savings because it's in escrow. You also don't have an office, and you don't have your business partner, this Mr. Calloway, to help close this deal. To make matters worse, your mother's gotten worse, and the only town doctor has been pulled away, so there is help coming in from Denver, but they're not going to be there till the end of the week. And so there's really nobody there to help provide the medicines that you need. I think that's a good place to start, because you have a couple of things that you have to deal with right away.
Yes, so could we lay out the conflicts very quickly again for our listeners?
So the conflict is going to be that Mr. Calloway has died, and as a result, you have no access to your funds, your money, and that your mother is very ill, and there is no doctor present to help her.
I think the place Mary would start is there was a doctor's office that we know of. Who has access to this space that exists but is currently not in operation?
This is probably in a row of temporary tenements that have been set up where people live, but there was sort of an office front set up in there, and it's an apothecary. But they do have medical supplies in the back, and this is where the doctor's been working. So we can say that what is the profession for apothecary? That person.
Yes, the proto-pharmacist. Wait a minute.
We'll call her Miss Goodall, is the apothecary person. She is there, even though the doctor is not.
Yeah, Mary's going to go visit the apothecary, and I think plead her case about we need to take action right now. What is the apothecary doing when Mary shows up?
So Miss Goodall is inside, and she has been drying some herbs. She has a shipment of crates and items that she's been unpacking, and so it's in a sort of in the middle of trying to do the herb work while also unpacking. And her hair has fallen down over her shoulders because she's probably been sweating. This has been a very busy morning for her, and so she doesn't even notice you when you arrive.
Is there anything that looks a little bit out of place, or is it just she's swamped?
She seems to be just swamped. I don't think that there's anything out of place, although it's difficult to say because everything's in disarray. There must have been a wagon train that came in this morning, but you hadn't seen that, or maybe something happened with the delivery on the railroad. What's out of place is that she seems very busy with the delivery, but nobody else in town seems to have seen a delivery like this.
Interesting. Mary walks in, not breaking in, obviously. I mean, I do uphold the law to certain extents, and says, Miss Goodall, is this a good time? You do seem quite busy this morning.
She looks up and she says, oh, it's so good to see you, but no, I'm sorry, we are not open right now. I have to put away all of these supplies, and as you know, the doctor is in Denver, and so I've been having to do all of his paperwork. So if there's something quick I can help you with?
My mother's not doing so well this morning, and I know the doctor is coming back at the end of the week, but is there any way you could let us have a little bit of medication, a little bit of medicine to help at least make her comfortable till the doctor comes back?
Oh, no, that is not ethical. I'm not trained, and I do not have a license. I can't. I'm sorry, I can't. And plus, he's locked his door. This is really not a good time.
But
she's trying to push you out at this point. Like not push, but she's stepping forward and trying to show you the door, grabbing your elbow.
Mary totally stands her ground and says, "But I mean, your ethics are to do no harm and to help those in need. Surely the law would support an ethical choice to help keep a patient comfortable and stable till the doctor arrives."
Okay, so you are trying to at this point convince her to give you medicine under the table.
Oh, yeah.
And here's where the game gets a little interesting, because we have to decide how are you going to do that and why. So you're using persuasive tactics, but are you lying to her? Are you being truthful when you say that this is something that's ethical, or are you being truthful and you're just trying to convince her?
I'm being truthful and I'm trying to convince her, because the line between morals, ethics, and laws in medicine is really weird.
Okay. Well, I hope you would know something about that. So we'll call this a navigate others. This is a flat roll. There is something extremely important that I completely forgot to tell you. You have a plot point.
Okay.
A plot point is a form of currency that you can use to take complete narrative control. At that point, I hand you the reins. You are now the MC, and you're running the game. That plat point you can also use to change your arc if you wanted to suddenly start falling or you wanted to suddenly start rising.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep that in mind. That's an important part of the game that probably should have come up earlier. but yeah, this is a flat move, so you can use this even anyway, and that is a personality roll.
Yes, navigate others. I'm going to make a roll in personality.
Yes.
And we have a 7.
Okay, so great. That means then that you have resolved the conflict. The conflict was that your mother is sick. That means since you resolved the conflict, you have now another plot point. So now you have 2.
Great.
You are rising in your arc now, so you have access to rising moves. And,
Interesting.
And now we are in that typical 7 to 9 result. So she'll kind of look into your eyes and her shoulders lower, and she thinks, and then says, "Okay, I lied. The door is unlocked, but I do not feel comfortable going in and taking the medication. I'm just going to act like I didn't see you."
I kind of want to, looking at the rising moves, want to befriend her as well and reassure her that, get her to trust me and reassure her of, it's going to be okay. Even if you look the other way, I will stand up and defend you if this comes and blows up in your face.
And why do you want to befriend her?
Because I think that given that someone has been murdered, there's a chance for further violence, and that having her in my back pocket will be helpful later on. I mean, like, in the spirit of doing good, right? We have to bring people to my side, right?
Right, yeah, and it's good you brought that up, because now there is a conflict in play about that murder, so that means you can confront that conflict and make another personality roll.
That one was not so hot. That was a 4.
Okay, so this means you do not get a plot point, Rach. You also lose an arc on that. So you never get to be flat again. Now you're falling.
All right, so I only have access to falling moves now?
You can also use flat moves. You can always
No more rising, though.
But no more rising. Now, should you choose to pull yourself together and rise of your own will, you can always spend a plot point to do that. So she kind of looks at you odd when you bring up when you say this, and she says, "You know what? There's some real concern in town. The doctor left not because he had to go to Denver for business, but because he's afraid he's going to be murdered. And I am very uncomfortable with sharing anything with you because I don't know who to trust. So you can go and get the medicine, but I'm going to have to ask you just to leave me alone and keep me out of whatever it is that you're doing. And I hope that you will get us the sheriff from the county to be involved in this, because it sounds like you don't really care that much."
Oh, ow. I could definitely get a sense of that falling from grace in that moment.
Yeah, she's giving you that cold look, and the sort of go and do what you got to do, but I don't want anything to do with you.
That just cuts into Mary's pride here, but it hurts at first, and I think she realizes what a misstep that was to try to use that social sway. So she quietly steps aside from the apothecary and then goes into the doctor's office to get the medicine and takes a moment to think on her words about going to get the sheriff and having the sheriff help fix this mess.
The medicine that you need is sort of totally outside of my scope of understanding of medicine and history, but we'll assume it's there, whatever it might be. It isn't locked up. He keeps a pretty tidy office, and they're just all the basics are sort of on a shelf in the back.
I'm okay with saying it's sort of generic medicine.
Just medicine with white label that says medicine. So she finds what she needs in there.
Yeah, no, Mary goes in and grabs it and leaves. And is there anything the apothecary does on the way out, or is she just completely shutting Mary down at this point?
She's turned her back to Mary and is putting things away on a shelf, but she's doing it very slowly and not very efficiently.
Yeah, so Mary steps outside of the office and out onto the street and starts heading towards home, because getting her mom stable, that's the most important thing right now.
Okay, as you are walking down the street, you see that Mr. Calloway's partner is approaching you very quickly. He says, you have got to talk to the sheriff now. He's asking a lot of questions about your business dealings with Mr. Calloway, and I'm afraid you might be in a lot of legal trouble right now.
What do you mean a lot of legal trouble? I mean, I know Mr. Calloway was murdered, but I have an alibi.
Why are you talking about alibis so quickly? I think this is a serious problem. You need to come to the sheriff immediately. He's in town. He's in your office. Or I guess you don't have an office. He's in, he's in a office.
Can it wait? I have to go check in on my mother.
No. So you are trying to make a move at this point by navigating him to say, come on, just wait just a minute. I have an important thing to do. However, there are no conflicts in play that you can use because you have already resolved one conflict. Actually, we've resolved both conflicts. So at this point, we need to create a conflict. Now you have a choice. I can create a conflict for you, but it's not going to be pretty. It's going to drive the story. It's going to be something that's not great for your character, and it'll introduce things. Or you can spend a plot point to create a conflict. You have a third choice. You can just take narrative control from me and tell me what happens, and just introduce whatever story elements you want, or whatever outcome you want.
I like the idea of spending a plot point to create a conflict.
Okay, great. I'll take it. What's your conflict now?
I think the conflict, if this makes sense, might be defend myself from the accusations against me.
Yeah, that's great. So, I would write on a card something like, I'm innocent, and we'll use that.
Plead innocence, prove innocence.
How you confront this conflict? I mean, you're falling, so you can enforce your will and say, you know what, I'm going to use your legal authority to do this in a sort of hand-fisted way. Or you could do it in just navigating him, saying, you know what, my mother's sick, and kind of play that angle. But it depends on your motivation. If you want this person to fear you, or if you want this person to help you.
Well, looking at my personality, and especially my personality while falling is judgmental, I'm going to be harsh on this guy. Like, how dare you feel that this situation is more important than my mother?
Yeah, you could also get other people in support of you and condemn him and make this a morality role instead of a personality role.
Oh, I like that. That's extra awful.
Yes, it is. And we've only rolled personality, so we may as well test out another stat.
Yeah, I'll gesture at who is somebody else out on the street right now that I have someone I've signed some forms for or helped with documentations with lately.
Well, there's one of the prominent landowners that has the largest silver mine in Silverton. He has been doing business in town and is there with many of his partners and associates.
I wave over this landowner and I'm like, did you hear what this man said? The law is more important than my mother's well-being? If someone was out on the street dying and I was like, oh, I gotta go sign this document, that's just foolish.
That's great. Okay, so roll condemn and let's see how this plays out.
Disturbingly well, that's a 12.
Okay, this means in this game when you roll 10 or plus, that means you have narrative control. So a falling move means that if you get a 10 plus, you are now falling even more. You shouldn't be
extra falling.
Yeah, you're extra falling. So you're falling more. So you've condemned this messenger. You have narrative control. You tell me how this goes down. This means, though, not just about you. You are the MC. You control everything about this right now for this beat.
Yeah, this exchange gets loud and heated, and it grabs the attention of everyone who is within earshot of the street. So even if they're in the buildings, like in the front rooms, everyone sees Mary's condemnation of Mr. Calloway's partner. And it really, I think, paints a vivid picture of her being this brash woman who is ready to stand up for her beliefs, but also, I think, calls into question the morality of the town.
Wow, that's great. So you defended yourself and have made yourself a Western villain.
That escalated really quickly.
But yeah, I think that's a good example of how it plays out and all of the tools you have available as a player.
Yeah, and it's a really great example of that very realistic tone and like that swing going from I'm trying to do this good thing for the wrong reasons and watch that moral descent while also knowing that there is a chance to rise above later. I really like it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was good. I would like to read this book.
Thank you again, Christopher, for joining me today. If people are looking to find more of your work online or maybe just follow your social media feeds, where can they check you out?
The best place to find all of my stuff is at christopher.world. I'm at Twitter, which is Gray Author. That's Gray with an E. And I'm really hooked into Facebook, so if you want to find me just on my daily interactions around games, I'm there. I believe it's just Christopher Gray. You can just find me.
And people can check out your Kickstarter until?
What is it, March 30th?
I don't have a calculator in front of me. Check them out before the end of March, please.
Before the end of March. And yeah, I would love to have your pledge and support. I'm very excited about this. Gallant Knight Games is publishing it, and Gallant does some really great work. So you're in for a treat on the quality and the production of it.
And again, thank you again for having this great interview today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was great. I loved it.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at +1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.
Hi listeners, I want to tell you about the Gauntlet Patreon. The Gauntlet is one of the most active, vibrant communities in tabletop role-playing games. We produce podcasts, the Codex Zine, Gauntlet Hangouts, Gauntlet Con, and more. If you love small press, independent tabletop role-playing games, the Gauntlet is for you. And you can help keep things going by pledging to our Patreon. This year we have 4 different pledge levels for you to join at, each of which comes with a number of benefits. At the $2 level, you get early access to our actual play podcasts, including Pocket Size Play, as well as a special Keeper of the Gauntlet title. At the $5 level, you also get a PDF of our monthly zine, Codex. Your name and Keeper of the Gauntlet title is listed in the back of each issue of Codex while your pledge is active. At the $6 level, you also get access to the Gauntlet Slack group, which is the heart of our community. And at the $8 level, you get early RSVP access to new game events on Gauntlet Hangouts. The $8 spots are limited based off how many early access players we think the Gauntlet Hangouts calendar can support. Every month on the 15th, we will make a small number of new $8 spots available. So if you want to play games with the Gauntlet, make sure you keep an eye on our Patreon page around that time so you can grab one of those rare spots. Finally, every member of the Gauntlet Patreon, no matter the level they pledge at, gets to attend GauntletCon each year for free. GauntletCon is our incredible online gaming convention, with over 200 game events and panels, competitions and prizes, and our bumpin' GauntletCon Discord server. Folks, we can't do all this awesome stuff without you, so go check out our page and please consider pledging. We're at patreon.com/gauntlet. Thanks.